Oh yeah, they're neat.
You must be Jay. You must be Rick. Yes. I don't know. Did you remind me to drive carefully? So I can't blame it on you.
This is an interesting one this week for me. We'll get there, but no, I know that. What I'm saying is, there are things I have answers to, and the things I don't have answers to.
That's good.
And that's good. And that
Not all the answers you got.
exactly.
Not God.
And this one's challenging because there's a dynamic shift in the woman at the well. It's a cataclysmic shift in how humans relate to God. Like, completely. Everything changed right then, that moment. And
He introduced the big change, and he introduces it to a woman.
To a woman who was Samaritan.
Samaritan woman, and one who
lived a completely opposite of anybody that you would normally think should.
you would not bring light to that person.
Correct.
If you were the one that chose.
Right.
Yeah.
And the implications of it, and what we as humans always go back to. It's just what we gravitate towards instead of moving towards what Jesus really wants us to do. Because we just do. I mean, it's just who we are as a people. And you have these huge cathedrals with giant organs and priests, and I mean, we do all of this stuff. And at the end of the day, you go, does God? I mean, what really matters in the end? So that's the challenging of it. So, all righty then. Hi. Bye. Do you need the door still open, or are you good with me shutting it, Elliot? He didn't hear me. No. Okay. Yes. I'm going to shut the door. Okay. I'm going to pray real quick because we need prayer. I need prayer. And then we all need prayer. And then we're going to dive into this. Whole word too. You know what? Who knows what tomorrow brings? Brings God. This, yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You mentioned there's a trifecta going on right now. You mentioned tomorrow. Well, today is the NCAA tournament. It's also St. Patrick's Day.
Yes.
Yesterday is John 3:16 Day.
Right.
So,
It's just massive. Cataclysmic in the mind. You know, 14th was Pie Day. That was Pie Day. Pie, well, which I had pie, so. But I have pie any day. Pie's good. Anyway, these relationships that you build here are going to be more important in the future than you could ever know. Period. And because when and I'm going to say when because basically it's here, when our money's worthless and we're just trying to survive, this is the only thing with meaning. We've created a whole world of all kinds of alternate meaning. It really doesn't have it, but you know what? It sure is comfortable. And we're very comfortable at being in it. And
Somebody asked me the other day, talking about chaos that's going on, saying that they needed to store up some stuff. I think I need to build some storage of stuff. What should I store? The answer was friends.
yes, seriously. Look, you couldn't store enough food. You couldn't store enough water. I mean, Okay, what does getting you through 2 months do? Seriously. You know, and 2 months of food is a massive amount in your home. I mean, that in of itself is, I'm not saying don't have some food storage or whatever, but I'm just saying at the end of the day, you can't store 4 years worth of stuff. This is going to go a long way. These are the things, and these are the, and these are the things that, I don't want to say I've avoided over the years, but I haven't really developed these kind of friendships over the years. I haven't. It's too easy not to. It's easy just to fly in. How's the weather? How's your job? How's the wife? How's the kids? All right, peace. I'm going to go live my life. So let me pray real quick and we'll get started. Father, we love you. We're going to talk about some big stuff with you today, and just the power of understanding you. And we love you. Send your Spirit on us and guide us in this time, and just help these conversations just develop a greater sense of who you are and what you mean to us. In your Son's name, amen. Okay. Ground rules, schmound rules. I leave those up there because if somebody new comes in, I do want to hit some form of ground rules with people and just say, this is who we are, and this is why we're doing this is what we're doing. Just diving right into kind of how we attack this, people kind of, if somebody new came in, it'd be kind of like, what are you guys doing? This is haphazard and wild. Yes, it is, and it's cool. So keep in mind time and perspective at all times. That's a big one. Where we're at. Boy, the purpose of John in this is real, because this story is very real. This story is just massive in us understanding who we are and who God is and how we function inside of that. So one thing, let me backtrack one thing. Remember we talked about why the Samaritans are the Samaritans, right? And it's kind of this, they kind of held on to, the explanation that I at least came up with was, they held on to what was in Judaism, but all these other people came in, so they kind of mixed it all, mashed it all. You know what I didn't do? I didn't read. A lot of times I think one of the great things about today's world and one of the downsides of today's world is information. Information is massively important, can point you in so many right directions, and you have access to it. But a lot of times you use it as a crutch and you don't go back and read exactly what it was. So I'm going to read to you why those people turned to Judaism along with the other things. It gives you a better understanding of who the Samaritans were and why they were who they were. 2 Kings 17. If you want to turn to it, I'll give you a second. 2 Kings 17, 24. It's 24 through 40. And remember, what happened at this time? So what had happened to Israel, the northern kingdom? Assyria had come in and taken it and took most of the people off.
Took most of the people all the way to Jerusalem and then packed up their bags and went home.
Yep. And did they take the brightest and the best, or they take the dregs of society?
They took the best.
They took the brightest and the best. They left the poor, the hungry, the huddled masses, so to speak.
Those that were still alive.
Those that were still alive, they left them around, right?
The way they took over a city was they stacked up the dead bodies like cordwood in front and used the went to go over the wall.
Yes, it was not a kind way of doing it. Okay, I'm going to read this because I found this fascinating. I wish I would have read this last week because my brain I was like, but why? Why Judaism? Why did they want Judaism involved in this and bringing all these other cultures in? There had to have been a purpose of it, and there was. The king of Assyria transported groups of people from Babylon, Cutha, Awa, Hamath, and Sepharvaim and resettled them in towns of Samaria. So the king of Assyria went out and gathered all these people from other regions and brought them into Samaria at this point after that he had taken the Israelites out, right? And the Israelites taken out were 10 of the tribes, but there was only 2 tribes left. It was Judah, and one other tribe was down south. Was it? I think it was Judah and Benjamin. I think was the only 2 tribes left, kind of down in the southern regions. Some Levi. Levi was everywhere, so I guess you could say a third. Those were the priests. But they didn't really have land per se. But since these foreign settlers did not worship the Lord when they first arrived, the Lord sent lions among them, which killed some of them. Okay, so we had a problem. This was what I said. I didn't get into the why. There was a why.
And we're worried about COVID.
We're worried about COVID, and they get lions. I'm walking down the road, gathering a little grain. Rah!
And God sent them.
And God sent them. So a message was sent to the king of Assyria. So imagine, now again, remember, time and perspective. It wasn't like they sent an email, and he got the email, and he sent a response back that day. This happened over probably a year, maybe 2 years, where lions are killing people. It's not a fun place to be. And so word had to get to the king of Assyria. And it's the peoples you have sent to live in the towns of Samaria do not know the religious customs of the God of the land. He has sent lions among them to destroy them because they have not worshipped him correctly. Okay, so bad worship means you get lions. Pretty good. The king of Assyria then commanded, send one of the exiled priests back to Samaria. Let him live there and teach the new residents of the religious customs of the God of the land. So one of the priests who had been exiled from Samaria returned to Bethel and taught the new residents how to worship the Lord. But these various groups of foreigners also continued to worship their own gods. In town after town where they lived, they placed their idols at the pagan shrines that the people of Samaria had built. Those from Babylon worshipped idols of their god Succoth-Beneth, and those from Cutha worshipped their god Nergal, and those from Hamath worshipped Ashima, and the Avites worshipped their god Nebaz, and Tartak, I really took on some words I didn't need to speak. And the people from Sepharvaim even burned their own children as sacrifices to the gods Adremelech and Anamelech, which probably had something to do with Molech at this point. I would have to see. When you get X in there, I'm sure there's some draws or similarities to what Molech was. It's pretty ecky. We come up with some good ones here. We wish we would write this stuff down because we got some good isms in here. That's good. I like that. We're ecky. These new residents worshiped the Lord, but they also appointed from among themselves all sorts of people as priests to offer sacrifices at their places of worship. And though they worshiped the Lord, they continued to follow their own gods according to the religious customs of the nations from which they came. And this is still going on today. They continue to follow their former practices instead of truly worshiping the Lord and obeying the decrees, regulations, instructions, and commands he gave the descendants of Jacob. Those name he changed to Israel. For the Lord had made a covenant with the descendants of Jacob and commanded them, do not worship any other gods or bow before them or serve them or offer sacrifices to them, but only worship the Lord who brought you out of Egypt with great strength and a powerful arm. Bow down to him alone and offer sacrifices only to him. Be careful at all times to obey the decrees, regulations, instructions, and commands that he wrote for you. You must not worship other gods. Do not forget the covenant I made with you, and do not worship other gods. You must worship only the Lord your God. He says that quite often in here. He is the one who will rescue you from your enemies. But the people would not listen and continued to follow their former practices. So the Samaritans were the Samaritans because lions. I found that just kind of, okay, there was a why. This wasn't just a haphazard, well, we're kind of holding. No, this was a command kind of from the king of Assyria that, hey, you guys better at least have some form of worship of this God of this land so that you can live in it, because otherwise he's destroying it. Which is kind of interesting because it goes on to assume basically that God kind of lifted his hand off of them because of their worship of him, but their worship wasn't exactly accurate.
So the first verse says the king of Syria brought people from Babylon, etc. Were these Jews who were there?
No.
No.
Other people from other lands.
This is
He's resettling people into this lands.
ethnic mixing.
Right. And
Then he said the lions could kill them because they weren't worshiping him, but they weren't Jews.
no. God sent lions to kill them. Yeah.
To
kill the people of the land because they weren't Jews.
weren't worshiping God.
Yeah.
But they weren't Jews. So
No, you're right.
So that's why they had to send a priest to try to tell them who God
The priest to tell them who God is, and they did do that because fear, true fear, not the fear of the Lord, but actual fear of dying, they did it. And
So they sent a priest to teach the people who weren't Jews how you're supposed
Yes.
And the Jewish people.
Yeah.
Because it was all mixed at this point. And one of the interesting things is that the priests that would have been captured from the northern kingdom and taken off to Assyria, they would not have been Levitical priests. Because
No.
when Judah and the northern kingdom separated, they each set up their own temples.
Correct.
Worship centers and established, the northern kingdom established its own priesthood. All that because they couldn't go to Jerusalem.
Right. They didn't intermingle at this point.
Right, they did not intermingle.
No.
So the priests quasi knew who Yahweh was and worshipped Yahweh, but they were doing it wrong anyways. At the wrong
Correct.
places, the wrong priesthood, and not following the right rules.
I just find this fascinating that that's how the Samaritans came to, that is the Samaritan. That's the story of the Samaritans.
They are mixed breed.
They are a mixed breed of all of these races of people, along with the Jews, the Jewish people that still currently live there. And the reason that they had this mishmash of worship was this. So they were a mixed breed, and this was who they were. This is the story of the Samaritans. This is how the Samaritan people. Yes. No. There were Jews among them, though. There was the remnant of Jews among them. There weren't many, but they were there. They mixed in with the Israelites that were currently there. That's what they did. Yes. Yeah, they mixed in with the people. There were people left behind. He didn't take every single Jewish person out of that area. He took a lot of them, but he didn't take every one of them. And that's why they become a mixed breed. Right. Important people. So you ended up with a group of people there with mixed heritage, mixed religious practices, all mishmashed together. The thing that just blew my mind, though, is for purpose. And that purpose is what we're studying. Right here. All of this stuff going on leading up to this passage with the woman at the well. And, when Jesus finally reveals himself as Messiah, it's to her. It's not to Nicodemus, actually, and we're going to talk about that a little later. I'm going to kind of put point and contrast. But Nicodemus didn't get to know that he was the Messiah yet. She did. It's interesting in that way. So anyway, that's the Samaritans. I point that out. So I said the random events with random things and random people. Nothing was random about that. That was my point. This is not random. This is. Yeah, go ahead. No, there were more Jews than that in the land. So, there were still people in the land. There weren't many of them, but there were Jews, Israelites from the tribes still left in the areas. Most of the culture was people that came down. There were some Israelites that mixed in with them, intermarried and so forth, and that's why they became known as a mixed race, a mixed breed of people. But mix wasn't just with Jews, though. It was with all these other cultures that he kind of threw this big melting pot in. He threw a bunch of people from a bunch of different lands and threw them all into one little area.
What was the reason for him bringing them?
He took over the land. He took the people. It's good land to reestablish the land and create a new people group.
Okay. Think about it. This king of Assyria, okay, he's conquering these lands. How do you subdue the land? Well, you take all the leaders out, you take all the important people out, and you put your own people in. You bring their cultures in and that stuff, and they're the ones who are running the place now. Okay?
Kind of. Yeah, there you go. I like that.
That's a really good example. Putin goes in and makes the mayors of all these towns. Okay? And puts Russians in there. Okay? And this happened 50 years ago, 100 years ago, when Ukraine was taken over by the Soviet Union. Okay?
Yes.
They put their own people in there. And so now you've got a mix of Ukrainians and Russians. And so Russia has the desire to make it Russian because there's Russians that live there. Okay? So that gives them an excuse to go in there and take over.
Gotta get rid of those neo-Nazis. Don't forget that.
But all of this is over an area and makes it his own.
Right.
He puts his people in there, brings in his cultures, brings in his religions, brings in all of this stuff.
And then people get mixed.
And they mix, they intermarry, I mean, some of the Jews will not intermarry, but some of them will, and you gotta learn to get along and all that stuff.
So the answer to my question is, the Jews were already there.
Correct.
So when this other people came in after them, they mixed.
Yes.
Yes.
And the Jews that were already there, he took all of the people that were the religious folks, so to speak. So there wasn't anybody left. I mean, let's face it, the poor, those people didn't worship God the way that the affluent people did. They didn't have the same access to the temples and different things. They couldn't read. I mean, I'm assuming anybody that read probably went off to Assyria or had any kind of language skills whatsoever. So he takes those people. What you do is you take the people of the land, you bring them up to you, and you intermix them where you're strong, and then you take your people to their area and you make it strong with your people. This is the beginning of empire. Because this is another interesting concept. Because up to this point, war was, I come in, basically kill you, and I take your lands, I move you out, and we settle in this area. Problem there is you only had so many people that could settle in a very specific area. So war didn't take over large paths of land. War took over small sections, tribes, etc., up to this point. So Assyria starts to work on how to create an empire, and then what becomes the world's first empire right after Assyria? The Babylonian Empire. Babylon comes in and really establishes the first true or known world empire in terms of how to take over an entire region and land and do it effectively enough that you can maintain control for a period of time.
The Persians came in and grew.
And Persians even made it bigger. Greece took over the Persians and made that even bigger. And the people that perfected it were the Romans. The Romans perfected it. The Romans did as well as you could probably do with that size of land mass in that time with the communication abilities and everything else. Correct. They had no idea. Most people, let's face it, most common people, they might, well, I mean, if you think of the Middle Ages, most common people didn't read either. That's why a stained glass window is a stained glass window. Stained glass windows was the way that a church could tell a story to the common people that had come and told the story in whatever way that they, whatever manipulation they really wanted to manipulate the story to be to control the people that were there. So during the Middle Ages, we had a lot of ignorance about God because basically the church kept them ignorant intentionally at this point. And same thing back then. I mean, if you were affluent, you had the means, you had the wealth, you had access. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, in Jerusalem, but the people that had access had power. The people that did not have access did not have any power and didn't really have any much knowledge about it whatsoever. Specifically after they turned away from God, the common person just stopped living their life in any, giving any kind of heed to Shabbat or any of the different ways in which the Jewish culture lived. So it was pretty easy for them to turn away and turn to these other idols because they did it. When he brought the king, the priest in, actually some of the Israelites might have learned about Judaism for the first time. Who knows? Very possible. Anyway, that was a fun one I saw. Sorry. Okay. I'm going to run just a quick reading of where we've been. I'm not going to try to dwell too much on it, but now when Jesus realized, we're just starting John 4. Now when Jesus realized that the Pharisees had heard he was making and baptizing more disciples than John, although it wasn't Jesus who did the baptizing, but his disciples, he left Judea and went back to Galilee. Now it was necessary for him to go through Samaria, so he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near a piece of land that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was also there, and Jesus, tired out by the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. What was the reason for Sychar? What was the reason for him going to this area? What was important about this area that we talked about last week? Jacob's well was there, so there's ties to their heritage of Jacob and even Abraham. But where else was this place located? Mount Gerizim, which was important to them. Why?
Because they have the temple there.
They ended up, they worshipped on that mountain, put a temple there eventually and so forth. after the fact. So Gerizim at this point to them, and actually there was a temple built and then a temple destroyed during the Maccabean time, and then, but they still continued to worship on that mountain even though the temple was gone. In fact, they actually, what was it, they were worshiping as late as 2013 there. Going there, there was 200 some odd Samaritan people that claimed heritage back to them, and they still would do their worship on Mount Gerizim in that area. Kind of cool. Or kind of interesting. A Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus told her, please give me a drink, since his disciples had gone off into town to buy food. What all was wrong with that? Why would him asking her for a drink be a problem? She's a woman. She's a Samaritan. She's unclean in every way possible. She's unclean by heritage. She's unclean by sex, and she's unclean by action. There was no other. You couldn't be any more unclean than that. There's unclean, and then there's unclean 3 times, right? And she was as unclean as they come. And he was and she, saw him as a proper Jewish man. Knew, hey, I know better than you talking to me right now is probably not a good thing.
Yeah, he would have had the tassels and he would have had the headscarf.
Yeah, he had some things on. Correct. The Samaritan woman asked him, how can you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a Samaritan woman? Because Jews do not have anything to do with Samaritans. Jesus answered, if you knew the gift of God and who it was saying to you, please give me a drink, you would have been the one to ask him, and he would have given you living water. He didn't necessarily answer her question, but he gave her a pretty big answer and basically said, hey, I'm the provider of living water, which would be cleansing, regeneration, new birth. That's how, and I think that's the best way of looking at any time he's talking about water. It brings forth those images, Titus 3, 4-5 type images that's there. Cleansing that leads to salvation. The woman told him, sir, you don't have a bucket and the well is deep. Where are you going to get the living water? You are not greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave you the well and drank from it along with his sons and his flocks, are you? Basically, you're crazy, aren't you? You're a little nuts. I understand. Jesus answered her, everyone who drinks this water will become thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I will give him will never become thirsty again. The water I will give him will spring up, will become a well for water for him, springing up to eternal life. The woman now told him, sir, give me this water so that I don't get thirsty or have to keep drawing water. He told her, go call your husband, come back here. The woman answered him, I don't have a husband. Jesus said, you're quite right in saying you don't have a husband because you've had 5 husbands, and the man you're now living with is not your husband. What you have said is true. The woman told him, sir, I see that you're a prophet. Our ancestors worshiped on this mountain, but you Jews say that the place where people should worship was in Jerusalem. That's where we kind of ended. Okay. There's a lot there in just that opening stanzas.
Jesus was saying this to the woman. Do you think she really understood what he was saying?
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, how could she? She had no frame of reference.
She didn't understand what living water was. She thought it was more physical.
He started talking, I think some indications where he did talk about eternal life. And that did trigger in her a response.
Living water is moving. And this is the well.
Right. It's stagnant. Right.
Also compare this to Nicodemus. He essentially had a similar conversation with Nicodemus.
Yes.
But Nicodemus didn't get it.
No. He didn't get it at all
So you
either.
got the woman and Nicodemus who are trying to figure out what he's talking about here.
They're both at 2 totally different,
Yeah, one is a
Yeah.
religious, knowledgeable, educated teacher
Yeah.
of the Jews.
the other one's a lowlife.
The other's a lowlife. They're in the same place. I just stole your thing.
No, you're good. Huh? No. No. I mean, I will, and Steve brings up a point here. We read this differently now, and it says something kind of different to us now because, why? Why does this have more of a meaning to us now than it would to the woman or even to the disciples at the time? Huh? We've been saved. What did being saved bring us? What do we have that most people didn't have then? The Holy Spirit to guide us, to give us an idea. I mean, this is the thing about Jesus' words that I think we still can't understand the brilliance of. He spoke words that had meaning back then, but that when written down from his people, from the apostles that wrote, from Paul, etc., it had meaning, and even a greater meaning 2,000 years in the future to me. That's cool. That's power. That's powerful language. Right. Yep. It is.
And in the chosen, doesn't he say something about it's from the heart and spirit, not actual?
Yeah, well, we're going to get into some of this. That's where we're going to go because we're going to talk about worship. Yeah, and you know, the chosen brings out. I mean, I want to say it editorializes a little bit. Let's say that. I mean, it editorializes as much as a pastor or teacher would, right? I mean, the things I say are not scripture when I tell a story. They're not the words of God. I'm not a prophet in the prophecy sense of when I speak, the words of God are being spoken and need to be written down and studied and for the rest of generation after generation. No. That's not how this goes. Yes. Yes, it's true. But there are concepts of people and of religious standards, even in quote unquote Christian social, specifically Christian cults, that the words coming from, well, what was the standard even in the Catholic Church? If the Pope spoke, it was the words of God. Well, yeah. So even in Catholic Christian circles, that certainly was the case. But there are cults, you know, and I'm going to speak of one of them now because I'm going to tell a story. That when the true teachers speak, that actually almost supersedes what happens and what was spoken of in the Bible. Like that's how important some of those people's words are. So there you go. All right, some summing up here. These events weren't spoken about at random. The events were spoken of for a purpose of the Spirit. So Samaritan came for water, 6th hour noon. So, I mean, what did noontime kind of ensure for Jesus? What did coming at noon? Because not just her coming out at noon. Why did she come out at noon? Nobody else was out there. Why did Jesus come out at noon? He had an appointment with nobody else out there. Right? Right. And this specific conversation was supposed to happen one-on-one. He did not want an audience here. One-on-one. A woman, a Samaritan, and an adulteress. He set it up. And this whole situation was set up centuries and centuries before. Jacob's well, the Samaritan people, the culture, the way the two cultures. This was set up for maybe a couple thousand years. I mean, when was it set up? Set up when God set up the world. That's the power of what God orchestrated. This is what we end up with. So, Jesus, one of the things you get out of this is it does point out that Jesus was human. He wasn't superhuman. He got tired. He got thirsty. He was hungry. Those things existed in Jesus' life. That actually, it was a point. John, I think, actually specifically pointed this out at the time that John would have wrote this because he would have been battling a lot of the Gnostic teachings at the time. And Gnosticism was all about Jesus was more of a spirit, and he wasn't in human form. It was more of a spirit form. And John was actually pointing out a lot of the human characteristics of Jesus, saying, no, Jesus was a human. He wasn't a spirit being and spirit entity that was all powerful. right? He had human characteristics. He suffered as we suffered, went through the same things. And the disciples were out to lunch, and quite literally at this time. They actually were out to lunch. Okay, to go get lunch, which I found fascinating too. They walked into a Samaritan village to go get lunch. Yeah. There wasn't a kosher deli there. Right? There was no kosher deli there. Let's just say that. Okay. Created, let's see, I'm just see if there's anything here. No, we're going to get into all that. Story time. Okay. In about, I moved to Indianapolis in, so I went 2000. I played at Arkansas, and I went back, and then that's when I got back to the job. Then I ended up, so about 2002, I took over this gas station I worked for British Petroleum. I took over this gas station in kind of the outskirts of the inner city of Indianapolis. Like it was about a mile and a half out of the downtown area. So I was in Indianapolis. I wasn't out in the suburbs at this point. It was right off one of the interstates. It was this Amoco station because BP had just bought Amoco. And it was this Amoco station that had this big building that a McDonald's was also in. So you had kind of this medium-sized convenience store and then the McDonald's along with it. And it wasn't two separate buildings. It was one big building. So, when I walk in, I could just walk up to the fountain machine for McDonald's, get a fountain drink, go in there, grab, and it was a decent-sized McDonald's. It wasn't like a McDonald's Express or anything. So it was kind of a medium-sized convenience store and this McDonald's in this place. And I was the manager of this convenience store. And soon after I took over, on Thursday and Friday mornings, this couple, Mr. and Mrs. Moore, it was a black couple. They were about 70, I want to say. Came in dressed to the nines at 6 in the morning. So I'm talking the hat, and this was the inner city of Indianapolis. You don't stop. There you go. And would talk to me at the front up there, and he was very outgoing. He was. She wasn't as much as outgoing as he was, but very outgoing personality, just kind of a fun, one of those fun personalities. He also was a barber. He had a barber shop down about a mile from that place there. But they were, what do you think? Dressed to the nines on a Thursday or Friday morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, about ready to, They were Jehovah's Witnesses. They were J-Dubs, okay? And they would invariably strike up small conversations with me at first, because most of the time at that time of the morning, I'm cashiering / getting things ready as a manager, and I start having the conversations, and just in small ways with them. And then after I finally kind of get some help in there, they'd stick around a little longer, and then I'd sit down with them in the McDonald's and start talking.
So they were coming back?
They were coming back every week, okay? And over time, we had some real conversations about this. I made them mad on several occasions. They never necessarily made me mad. They weren't ever going to talk to me again, and then they would come back. Mr. and Mrs. Moore were very dear people. Okay, I was his little white buddy. I'd go down to his barbershop a couple times and just meet and see the people that he was around down there. Became sort of friends. Not friends in that I went and hung out with them since, but friends in that I was happy to see them on a week-to-week basis. Sent emails back and forth a couple times of course, he was bringing his Jehovah's Witness propaganda. I would counter it with mine. I love those two people. I love their dedication. I loved who they were. Okay. They were special people. I'm just going to leave that story right there, okay, for now, because it has an implication here. So let's move to John 4:21 through 24. Jesus told her, "Believe me, dear lady, the hour is coming when you Samaritans will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You don't know what you're worshiping. We Jews know what we're worshiping because salvation comes from the Jews." So, I have an interesting question here. In Jesus' ministry, what type of people did Jesus compliment as he had his ministry? So he had several conversations with people, and there was a very distinct trait of the people that he would compliment about. Look at the size of their faith. This person had did some amazing things. What was the one characteristic of those people that he would compliment over and above anybody else? See if you can figure it out.
You talking about a religion or a tribe or?
Just there was a distinctive trait of those people. The person, think of the stories. What are the stories where Jesus said, hey, that person had a tremendous amount of faith? What's a story that comes off the top of your mind? Centurion. He didn't compliment Abraham. It wasn't that wasn't necessary. Yeah, centurion.
The woman who came up and issuing blood and touched his.
Okay. Most of those, if not all of them, were either directly said or could be assumed that they were Gentiles. Right? So right here, we know you Jews, you don't even know what you're worshiping. And the centurion that came and asked about his son, and why was the centurion's faith so awesome? What did he say about him? Because what did the centurion? He said, hey, you need to heal my son.
You don't have to come.
You don't even have to come. He says, I know how this works. I tell my men, they go do. If you say it happens. Just say it and they'll be healed. Right? That's the faith of a Gentile. The people that are all, right? Because here's the deal. Was this necessarily a positive comment that the Jews knew what they're worshiping? Was that actually a positive comment about them? Not necessarily, okay? Let me see if I put it up there. I'm going to go here. Isaiah, I want to say I think I put it on a different slide. Let's see if I can figure out. There it is. Okay. Isaiah 29. Let's go to Isaiah 29 real quick. I want to point out something about the fact that he said, hey, you don't even know what you're worshiping, but we Jews know what we're worshiping because salvation does come from the Jews. But let's talk about the Jews' faith for a second. Isaiah 29. Where are you at, Isaiah? Open Isaiah. Open. There we go. We're getting there. We're moving there. I probably should have bookmarked it. Okay. Isaiah 29:13. And so the Lord says, these people say they are mine. Who's he talking about? The Israelites. They honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship, and their worship of me is nothing but man-made rules learned by rote. Okay? So, just because they know what they were worshiping, did that make them any better? I could make an argument it made them worse. There was no substance to it. They had the truth even in front of them and they ignored it. I think that's why Jesus was much more complimentary of Gentiles and of people that were, and number two, he was much, much more compassionate towards people who were not religious. You could even say the less religious you were, the more complimentary he was about who you became and how you worshiped. Right? Whether you talk about the woman, the woman at the well, certainly, but you've got the woman caught in adultery. You got to assume there's some special grace given to Mary Magdalene for all the things that she went through. The people, the lepers, the cripples that he healed, so forth and so on. Those weren't people of huge religious reputation. Those were the dregs, the poor, the people that did not have access that the other people had, right? So certainly he had a lot of compliments for Gentiles, but he had his main real sense of compliments were to the non-religious people, the people that they weren't professional theologians. They weren't the ones that were seen very highly. Yep. Here you go. Let's go to 14. This is good. Because of this, I will once again astound these hypocrites with amazing wonders. The wisdom of the wise will pass away, and the intelligence of the intelligent will disappear. Anyway, that was a neat side note there, because basically, this, if you read this kind of in our language, we kind of say, he's kind of saying, you don't really know what you're worshiping. The Jews knew what they're worshiping. But when you really get down to it, this wasn't a compliment for the Jews. You could actually read into this the exact opposite, because they know what they're supposed to be worshiping. They just don't do it right. That's why what you know, it's who you know. Who do you know? What was that song? You can walk on the water. It was as a kid, this song is in my head because my dad had a contemporary Christian radio station. I'm talking, this is back in the day, early 80s. Anyway, I used to sing it when I was 2, real loudly. Funny. Anyway. Yeah. Jesus told her, believe me, dear lady, the hour is coming when the Samaritans... Oh, I already read that. The question is also, what is the significance of place? Why did place matter so much on a mountain in Jerusalem? What was the significance of place at this time?
Well, in the case of Jerusalem, that was chosen by the Lord to build where it fell. Actually, was chosen by David, but
That's an interesting comment too, because I don't know if we've ever talked about it in here, but did God really choose the temple?
not really.
He didn't. David basically kept asking him about it, kind of like a 2-year-old kid. Can I build it? 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 Right?
You say, God, you deserve something better than a tent.
Right.
Okay.
And what did God establish for them?
Well, he said you're not going to have it now, but I'll let Solomon do it.
True, but God's real direction was the tent. That's what he gave them. He gave them the tabernacle. And it was David who kept pushing for the temple. He said, "Oh, you got to have something better. And it didn't even. I would say this. I think in his head he was thinking, God, you're God. Look at this palace I live in, and look at this dinky tent down there." He's looking down at the tent from his palace, going, "Look at this." Now he thinks that's okay. Yes. God never asked for the temple, but he got one.
The Jews wanted to be like all the other nations.
The Jews wanted to be like all the other nations, with a king in a palace, with power and pomp and circumstance, and something to be proud of. Showy. Welcome to the world. Welcome to humanity. We love pride. It's my favorite sin, so to speak, of what we like.
But in his mercy, he showed up at the temple.
In his mercy, he still showed up. In his mercy, he stopped the lions eating the Samaritans. Right? I mean, the woman of the well wouldn't have been there. Yes. Lion food. Okay? I am just struck by the massive awe of all of the stuff that makes this up. I don't even know it's hard for me to describe what's going on in my head, because I'm like, it keeps going and going and going. I go, okay, I can't contain all that. I got to bring it in something a little more palatable, of what I can kind of comprehend, because this is getting boom. I mean, your mind just can explode with how far this can go with who God is and how he works. Because I can't even have a thimbleful of it. Right? Yes. Nobody's in them. Allegedly. Yep. Place.
But those people who, the ones who really truly believed in God knew that what they were building was ephemeral. But it's a way of showing God you want to honor him.
Yes. Place became hugely important to any religious practice of the time. It was everything. Whether it was the temple, whether you built an altar, where you sacrificed to Molech, babies, women, you can name it. Place became the worship up to the point of Jesus and talking to the woman at the well. Worship was an act that you went and did someplace. Okay? Even in you would say, even in pagan circles, you would go to a place in your home or a place outside, have an altar, do some kind of incense or burning or whatever you want to do to have a time for homage to whatever God that you're doing. Solomon built altars and temples and things for the women in his life, as an example.
Well, they still do it now.
They still
Buddhists do it.
let's face it. This is what we do with religion. You have irreligious people that try to avoid any of it, and then you have the religious people that always want to bring it back to a place. Even in truly Christian circles, the church actually is a wrong definition of the word ecclesia in the Bible. Ecclesia, real meaning is congregation. When Jesus said, I will build my church, he will say, I will build my ecclesia, I will build my congregation. The word church that we use, okay, was a German word for house of God. A building. Well, didn't mean it, but it became it. So when I say the church, people assume I mean that building, that place I go to. But what's the true meaning of the church? The people, an assembly, a congregation. This is the people that it is. So even in our circles, we've done this. Okay, it's not evil, it's not nefarious. We didn't mean to do it, but hey, I'm going to go up to the church and grab my Bible or grab my whatever, or go. I'm meeting Will up at the church. This is what we say. This is what we do. This is the language that we've created. We created a language that basically keeps, and that's the lies of Satan, trying to keep us from the true way in which we're supposed to be, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. Anyway, okay.
But then people started to,
Boy, what's the phrase? The road to hell is paved with good intentions. I'd say a lot of the Catholic Church, period. I present to you the road to hell leads to good intentions. The Catholic Church, period, was created because people needed to hear truth in the first 3 centuries, and they had to depend upon apostolic succession of people because they didn't have a working Bible. They didn't have something to hold the truth. So you had all these groups, Gnostics, Epicureans, and so forth, saying all these crazy things about who Jesus was and wasn't and all this. And you needed a source and a person and a group to give you to say, hey, that's wrong, this is right. Okay? Now, persecution had a great way of keeping that pure. People didn't just do this because it was fun, because being a Christian was not fun in the first 3 centuries. It cost something. It cost your citizenship, your life, your well-being. It cost you to be a Christian. So those people that did this at great personal, sacrifice. Once Constantine basically legalized, not only legalized, but gave Christianity power, all of those things gave political power. All of those things that were created for good intentions became the epicenter of actually squashing true biblical Christianity, and led it to, here's a cathedral, you come, say your Hail Marys, you take your, you do this, you do that, you go home, you have your, basically communication. You don't communicate with God. The priest does, so you got to go to the priest to communicate with God. And when you pray, you actually pray to Mary or Joseph or, you name the saint, and you're praying to the saint because the saint's the one's going to pray for you. And I mean, all of those things came out. But the good intention was it came out of the fact that they needed some people to hold truth during the first 3 centuries. So even the road, this whole system we created was created out of good intentions and right intentions. It just down the wrong paths. Anyway, okay. Yet the time is coming, and is now here when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. Indeed, the Father is looking for people like that to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. Okay. What time is it? Wow. Okay. We might get through this, probably won't. Up to this point, and with the passages in this, how was God worshipped by the Israelite people up to this time? I just read it in Isaiah, so I don't want to, but basically, they worship God in a very nothing but man-made rules learned by rote. What's rote? Ritual. By a ritualistic service, thinking that it had some form of meaning to God. Right? That, their dedication in that animal sacrifice that they did because they just said it was the right thing to do actually had meaning to God. Like God. Did God need them to sacrifice a goat? Did that do anything for God? Now, if done from the right heart and the right attitude, the sacrifice of the person of the animal in the right way was a pleasing aroma to God. And it wasn't the sacrifice itself. It wasn't the goat that they slain that they put on the fire. It was the heart and the attitude of the person that made that happen that became the pleasing aroma to God. But you see the difference? What they turned it into was these acts have some kind of meaning. Holding the Sabbath had meaning to God. No. Sabbath was made for the people. People weren't made for the Sabbath. Right? Those things played in. So, up to this point, worship was not being done very well. Their worship, the worship of the Israel, the worship of the Jews, was unacceptable to God. What about the worship of the rest of the world? Was it acceptable to God? No.
It's pretty much the same way.
Unacceptable. I don't know why it came to my mind. I'm going to say it and then I'm going to move on. But even the points that Will's been making about marriage and about divorce and about things like this. Does God give you a holy high five when you go through those things? No. Now, he gives us grace, mercy, forgiveness, love, and life to handle it. But even in those things, God never celebrates sin in our life. He just doesn't. It's not, that's not something that's there. God didn't celebrate these actions of these people. It didn't mean anything to them. So, and I'd say this, like I said, the Jews' practice probably even was worse to God because they had the ability to at least try to understand it, where the rest of the world really did not. They were doing it out of ignorance. Okay. What is the significance? Why did he say God is spirit? Why was that meaningful here? And now we're getting into the questions that I'm just really fighting for answers for. I don't have the answer to this. This is not something I have the answer for. This is more of a conversation. But God is spirit. Why is that meaningful?
That's from the standpoint that we didn't have to go to Jerusalem.
I like that.
That God can be worshipped anywhere, and he's available to the Samaritan or a beggar or a tax collector.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Yes.
That's the way I see it.
That's so God is made himself available to everyone. That showed that and part of what you're saying here, He's omnipotent, he's omniscient, he's all-knowing, he's everywhere. So God being spirit is important from a knowledge of he is everywhere. He's not, right now, he's not ignoring me because he's talking to Jay. He can be with all of us at the same time.
Like the Samaritan woman said, well, I can't go to Jerusalem, they won't allow me to.
Right?
And so he's telling her, you don't have to.
Yep. That's awesome. I like that. That's
Powerful.
that is very powerful.
They brought that up.
Yep. Okay.
Saying she can have conversation with the Holy Spirit anywhere.
Yes.
She probably didn't understand that.
And she didn't understand it, but he just made God available to her. And has God ever been available to her? She didn't know it, though. She didn't know it. God's being spirit there. A lot of people put God in a box, or gods, plural. Let's talk about the fact that pagan religions, gods were at best aloof, non-caring of what's happening in the world. You know, Zeus, Apollo, Hercules. What are some of the Hades? They were annoyed having to get into the world's problems. They wanted to be left alone. They didn't really, in other words, they didn't have a lot of care or concern. Their form of gods in the pagan world did not have a lot of care or concern about what was going on in this current world. That wasn't their, huh? Yes, good word, capricious. They were capricious. I love that. I like big words. I don't like using them all the time, but when you've been there, done appropriately, they work. They,
You have to ask, say, the God's Spirit, they knew exactly what God was saying. That would be one God could be with them.
right. Who was that? Adam and Eve before they fell. You're right.
Because they were connected to
They were connected to him.
connected to him, Spirit.
Yep.
Their spirit was alive. We struggle because our spirit was once dead, now it's like we're alive, right?
Well, okay, so I talked about this from pagan cultures, circumstances, but even in Christian circles, when you build these massive cathedrals and you do your church services in Latin and you chant, when people come into those environments, God is distant. God is untouchable. God is up there. And they even say, you can't approach him. You need to pray. You need to go through the priest, and your prayers go through another entity. They don't go straight to God. You have to pray to Mary. You have to pray. Do you see what I mean? God is up here and you're down here and you don't have access to him. And John's saying right here, you got access. He wants to have access with you. So that was wonderful. Thank you. That was a good explanation. You did good. Okay. It is very important that God is spirit. God, you know, and all of the things that go along with that. Now, I want to talk. I want to say this is a negative question. I want a negative answer to this. Is the best way of putting it. But how does our world and even Christian world handle worship? How do we generally treat worship as a general rule right now? Not the what's supposed to be right, but what's the reality of how the world treats worship and how even the church at some level treats worship?
We show up on Sunday,
We show up on Sunday,
play the right music,
play the right music, dress the right way,
dress the right way, and we worship together.
and that's worshiping. Okay?
Depends on what time service starts.
That's right. And if your favorite team's playing at the same time, you go worship the Kansas City Chiefs. Yeah, because there are examples of true worship in this world. Go to rock concerts. Go to football games, sporting events. People worship. It's wrong worship, but we worship all the time. I mean, our greatest asset is time, and basically, what do we spend our time doing? This is always a part of my mind. All the time. I mean, how many people bow down to this dang thing?
Don't take
Oh. Well, I mean, before this, television, before the television, radio, boredom, free time, I want to say, or the illusion of free time has created so many different ways in which people are presented ways to worship other than worshiping God. In so many different ways. The bar. That's worship. I mean, right now, today. What is today? What is today, by the way? St. Patrick's Day. And what is St. Patrick's? Now, the idea of St. Patrick's pretty cool. He was a slave that, left Ireland and became a Christian in Scotland and went back to Scotland and brought people to Christianity. This is a good story. And how do we celebrate it? And green beer. We go back, you know what I mean? I mean, so a lot of people are worshiping tonight. And we'll be regretting some of that worship in the morning. Okay? I'd say even, in Christian service, we have, aside from those things, we have a general passive attitude towards worship. Even how we talk about it in here. Yeah, and we don't treat it as such. Oh yeah, well, I mean, let's face it. In a lot of circles, even you come in here, let's face it. If someone really gets into worship in here, probably I'd say 80% of us would kind of be uncomfortable.
It's more of a one-on-one relationship as opposed to a group.
Yes, with a pretty good no. Because yes, because there is an aspect of worship that is God is spirit, and I can worship God one-on-one. I don't have to have an intermediary between me and him. I can come to him daily, hourly, minutely, and he will respond to me. But the problem is, do I do that? So what do I need in order to do that more often? This. Right? So worship, you're right, yes. Worship is one-on-one with God, it's there. But what we need the group to keep us moving in the direction of doing that, because on our own, left to our own devices, we will fail to do it. We'll spend less time doing it. Okay.
Just for a moment, see how beautiful he is. And how much he cares for us. And I don't know how you get to that place.
This was my challenge of this, because I suck at worship. Okay? I do. It's not, I'm bad at prayer and I'm bad at worship. It's just, those are my challenges. My youngest brother, great at prayer. Good at worship, great at prayer. He's a prayer warrior. He can pray. It's given to him to do that. He struggles in other things. The way I work, it's funny because people listen to Christian music as worship, during the day, either on the radio or in the thing right there. Me, actually, it's sermons. I want to hear people speak on it. I want to hear, and I want to contemplate, and I want to go through it. So I don't respond as well to music as I do to teaching. It's the way I worship. It's the way I'm kind of wired to worship. I want to hear truth. We do. That's my point. My point is this. We worship. We have different strengths and weaknesses in our worship. We worship differently. And when we put ourselves together, it puts a pretty good thing together. No. It's tough, though.
There's an urgency to preaching.
Yes.
And there's almost nobody on the radio that preaches.
No.
Almost nobody even preaches in church.
No.
Mostly teaching.
Yes.
It's instruction.
Yes.
But preaching is a powerful, powerful thing. You can't just say, well, let's start preaching. There has to be a passion. And the passion is when the Holy Spirit comes in a way that's like...
Well, how will they know if they don't hear? Anyway, okay. I got 15 minutes for the next major topics of concern here. How important is worship? Okay, how important? How important is it? Who's heard of the Westminster Shorter Catechism? That sounds Catholic, right? Huh? It sounds Catholic. It's not. What is it? It came out of England, and who in England? It's the Puritans, which is basically the forefather to Reformed theology now. Reformed theology, Presbyterian churches, technically speaking, were Reformed theology. When it went through the Reformation, you had Martin Luther, who started the Lutheran side, and then you had Zwingli over in Switzerland. Huh? Yeah, Zwingli. And he started more of what became known as the Reformed or the Presbyterian church. And they called it the Reformed because they were Reformed, they kept the language of the Reformation at this point. People that you would know that hold to Reformed theology, John Piper. A lot of people that hold to Calvinism in some way are in Reformed theology. I don't want to bore you with all of that. But so a lot of people have a Reformed idea of how they see God and so forth. So the Westminster Shorter Catechism. It's not Catholic, actually. It was out of England. It was out of in Scotland, England. It actually says this. It was agreed upon by the Assembly of Divines at Westminster with the assistants and commissioners from the Church of Scotland as a part of the covenanted uniformity in religion betwixt the churches of Christ in the kingdoms of Scotland, England, and Ireland. Okay, that's a long way to say it. The Puritans came up with the Westminster Shorter Catechism. Okay? I'm going to give you, because the Shorter Catechism basically asked a question and provided an answer. The very first one of the Westminster Shorter Catechism. What is the chief end of man? The chief end of man is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. That's how important worship is. It's not something we just casually... The chief end of us, it's our purpose, is to worship God and enjoy Him forever. And John Piper actually somewhat encompasses this in a quote that just stuck with me since college. God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in Him. So, worship. No. I don't know what I am. Because the tenets of Calvinism are true. But so is a bunch of other things too. They're trying to pick and choose a side here, and there's so much more to it than just trying to pick a side. Calvinism basically is total predestination. Like predestination on steroids. Like nothing that... I've seen people who became what's called hyper-Calvinists. I've seen hyper-Calvinists destroy entire missions in the mission field, where people started talking about the fact that it's total predestination. It's only God that makes everything happen. Therefore, there's no reason for me to be spreading the gospel because God will do it. That's hyper-Calvinism. That's what that means. Calvinism and Arminianism is the two isms that kind of compete. I think it's Arminianism, right? Yeah. Which is, and Arminianism is sold out free will. It's all free will and not God. God has no real bearing on you. It's not the Spirit. It's not God that brought you to Him. It's you. You made the decision. That's the battle. The battle is between sold out predestination, sold out free will. I look at it like this. God does everything. He created this. This is how He wanted it to be. And everything's going to happen the way He wants it to happen. And He's in charge. That's absolutely 100% true. But the only thing that I know is in the here and now, I have to make a decision. I don't know anything different than making the decision. That has to be made. I can't avoid the decision just because I want to have the cop-out that God is in control. because that becomes the cop-out. Okay. Anyway, sorry.
In this discussion here of God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in Him, take this into Will's sermon about marriage. When it's about you and you being satisfied and all that, it's not about God anymore.
It's not about God anymore.
Okay, not glorifying God. But when it's about the other person, when it's about God, and in particular when it's about God first, when you're satisfied in Him with who He gave me.
Yes.
Okay. No, you're not perfect. I am so
Please don't
satisfied.
tell my wife that.
But I am so satisfied. You know, this is the point. You know,
Yeah.
God did this for me.
Yeah.
You know, God put you two together. You know, and all this stuff. It's that satisfaction in what God has done to the point where you give Him the glory for it.
For it all.
That's worship.
That's worship. It's the beginning of worship for sure.
It's the beginning of worship.
Okay. So, then he says, worship in spirit and truth. In fact, it's those who worship Him must. This is a must. This isn't a nice to, a want to. This is superlative language. Those who worship Him must worship in spirit and in truth. Okay? Okay, so we've got some, what would be, I don't know how I'm going to do this in 10 minutes. Okay, how do we worship in spirit? What is worshiping in spirit? I kind of came up with something in my head because this one's tough. Because a lot of times when I talk about this, it sounds like truth. Okay?
We're not worshiping something that we see like an idol or anything. We just know God's here.
Okay, there's one of them. Faith is a substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen. That certainly can go that direction, saying God is spirit, and worshiping Him in spirit is I don't have to see an idol. There's one. I don't have to have an object to worship, right? There's no object of God. I don't have some decorative piece that I say, hey, okay, that's my representation of God, and I'm going, huh? Other than His word. So that's good. I like that.
Do it because you want to, not because you feel like you have to.
The heart, their spirit is by the right heart. Okay? Examples. I would say in Luke, you have the parable of the tax collector and the Pharisee, right? Pharisee walks in, basically, thank you, God, for giving me all my things that I've been given, being a Pharisee, and that I'm not like that tax collector right there. And the tax collector goes up and can't even puts his face down, beats his chest and say, have mercy on me, a sinner. I am not worthy of this. Spirit, heart. The heart of the matter is here. Okay. This one was a challenge to me because I go back to my story of Mr. and Mrs. Moore. I love those two. I grew to love them. I don't know what happened. I don't know when they passed away. I'm sure they passed away by now because it was 25, 30 years ago. In our society, I want to say in the world, there are swings of, how do I say it? There are swings of people having more grace or attempting to have more grace about people, and then there's swings towards people being very zealous for law, zealous for, what's the word I'm looking for? Zealous for legalism, okay? And there are times in all societies, people will punish people because they don't believe a certain way or look a certain way or do a certain thing, right? That's always been there. But I think we've had a swing in our society where everybody wants everybody just to be saved. Well, if the Buddhist has the right heart, they'll be okay. They'll be in heaven. If you do just what's right, you'll be in heaven. I want to believe that Mr. and Mrs. Moore are with God with all my heart. Okay? I want it more than anything. I prayed for it. But if I'm going to worship God in truth, And that's why I said I got 5 minutes to try and do truth. And we may have to go back into it over here. Because there are some hard truths for proper, acceptable worship of God. What's one of the primary ones? Let's see if we can challenge ourselves to figure out. What's a primary truth that destroys anybody's ideas that anything other than Christianity will lead someone to God? What's the number one thing?
Died for us.
Who died for us?
Jesus.
The number one truth.
I am the way, the truth, and the life.
I am the way, the truth, and life. No one comes to the Father but through me. Every time, and I was going to print it up, but I didn't even get to it, so I'm not going to really worry about it. Maybe I bring the examples the next time. Every time Paul starts a letter or prays for his people, I thank the Lord our Father and I thank God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. Every time he prays. It's not praying just to God, it's praying to God with Jesus. John 5. Let's go to John 5 real quick. Because even later in John, he's having a conversation here. And so John 5, I want to say, that's a long passage, but so he's having a conversation with the religious leaders, and they're I'm just going to read it. It's the Bible. It's okay. We can get over me reading the Bible, right? Okay, good. We're going to start in verse 16. John 5:16. Okay. So the Jewish leaders began harassing Jesus for breaking Sabbath rules. Now, what was Jesus breaking? Was he breaking spirit? Was he breaking truth? No, he's breaking their traditions. Okay, but anyway, it's beside the point. But Jesus replied, "My Father is always working, and so am I." So the Jewish leaders tried all the harder to find a way to kill him, for he not only broke the Sabbath, he called God his Father, thereby making himself equal with God. That's a pretty big statement, but he goes on. So Jesus explained, "I tell you the truth. The Son can do nothing by himself. He does only what he sees the Father doing. Whatever the Father does, the Son also does. For the Father loves the Son, and the Son shows him everything he is doing. In fact, the Father will show him how to do even greater works than healing this man. Then you will truly be astonished. For just as the Father gives life to those he raises from the dead, so the Son gives life to anyone he wants." Now, is there any language in here that he's not equating himself with God? None of this, all of this language is basically saying, what God says, he's given that authority to me. In addition, the Father judges no one. Instead, he has given the Son absolute authority to judge, so that everyone will honor the Son just as they honor the Father. Anyone who does not honor the Son is certainly not honoring the Father who sent him.
Well, there can be, we can go really deep down this, but what is it, Cornelius? Maybe I have that wrong in the Old Testament, that he was a generous person, helped the poor, knew nothing of Jesus or anything, but it was credited to him as, maybe I borrowed from Abraham there. But,
Yeah.
but
And certainly Old Testament saints were held accountable to a different standard than this.
right.
And number two, and I will always say this, I am not the judge. Okay? I don't have a standard by which to judge this by.
And we all know Jesus. We for sure are held to that standard.
But my question becomes this. If I held back in my conversations with Mr. and Mrs. Moore, did I truly love them? Because how easy would it have been for me to water down the truth of who Jesus was for their sake? Because I loved them, and I did. I did not want to have a confrontation with them. I don't want to tell them that the things that they're believing. But the problem with Mr. and Mrs. Moore's faith was their faith was in all the wrong things. They went out on Thursdays and Fridays not to win people to Christ. And he was challenged with that with me because his wife tried to convince him to stop coming to see me because I was such a problem for them in reconciling their faith. Because a Jehovah's Witness is taught in the cult that when someone presents, I say truth, but when what they've turned it into through their brainwashing is they've turned it into the things of Satan. See, they pointed the truth as things of Satan. When they hear that, they are to turn away and run and not worry about it, because their goal in going out and witnessing is not to bring people to faith in Jehovah. It's to save themselves. Their act of going out door to door is not for you to come to God. Their act of going door to door is for them. It's what they're asked to do. They could care less, technically, if you ever grace the doorstep of a Jehovah's Witness temple.
It's interesting, I just watched a 20-minute video of some young lady that is a grounded Christian and on purpose went to a Jehovah's Witness Kingdom Hall to see what it was like. Apparently she knew someone there, had an acquaintance there. At first they're all lovey-dovey, like we're going to convert this person, and then they just, after like week 3, as they're tolerating the person, they, at this one particular one, I don't know that they're all like this, and this is what she said, there's actually it looks like a crying room at a church, a glass room, but it's not for women or mothers or dads or whoever with young kids that are screaming. No, it's for the people that are out of fellowship, that didn't follow all the rules to cross the T, dot the I, and they're trying to earn their grace back. Another thing that stuck out was, that's what it's something I heard on YouTube, okay?
It was on the internet, must be true. But no,
But one more thing I want to point out is that the Watchtower magazine was like
that's their Bible.
the Bible's like here, but they almost never refer to it. It's all about the Watchtower.
Correct.
Thing.
Well, that's what I was referencing when I said people that look to prophets as being the answer or the God instead of the Bible. In fact, they intentionally altered their Bible to try to, at least at some level, and they can't even do it all the way because it would just, I mean, they butcher linguistics in the first place to do what they did. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was a God. That's how they get around John 1:1. There's many other but even they couldn't get around what I just read because they couldn't linguistically, they just have to ignore it. See, Mr. and Mrs. Moore tried to, at their best, to ignore me. What the faith that I had in them was the fact that they kept coming back, because I do believe they did love me. But true, Jehovah's Witnesses are all about what they're doing for their purpose. And the reasons that they, first of all, why is their worship untrue? Well, number one, they do not believe Jesus is the way to God. They don't believe that Jesus is God. And it says right here, if you don't believe this, can't worship God. It's not any more plain than that. You worship God through Jesus. Jesus and Father are one. And there are a lot of people in our society who say, well, I worship the all-loving God, but all that Jesus stuff and everything else is not true, and I don't want to do that. Is that true worship? It's not. It's not true worship. No matter how, this is the dichotomy we live in, okay? Because we live in a way, at the same time, I'm called to have grace, mercy, compassion on people. And it's very easy if I start going down this world of truth that I lose grace, mercy, and compassion, right? That's the problem. That's the problem. We this balance we very, very seldom have in truth and mercy and grace. I tried with them. I hope I did something. I want to see Mr. and Mrs. Moore with me in the kingdom. I really do. And but it was just an interesting way of looking at it, going, no matter what my compassion was for them, though, I was called to tell them the truth about Jesus. Because they can't worship God if they don't do it in spirit and in truth. And
God's word does not come back void.
no, it does not. I hope.
They had a personal
You know what? There's a part of me. If you put a gun to my head with the cults specifically, and I'm talking cults of Mormonism, Jehovah's Witness, Catholics for the most. I'm not going to say Catholicism's necessarily a cult, but does it lead people to a salvation in God? Huh? It can. Does it as a general rule? It's tough. I'm just saying. There are a lot of. I would say this: are there Catholics that are Christians? Are there a lot of Catholics that are not Christian? Yes. Agreed. Very much agreed. Okay.
We have categories that we have in our minds of what we ought to do and what not. Nobody's going to stand in front of God and say, here's what I believe. He said, okay, come in.
Right. Well, when we talked about this, Constantine's the one that started it. It wasn't how you loved, because Christians were known for how they loved, right? That's you will know that you know me by your love for one another, right? That's John 13:34. Done. Known by love. Constantine started by you're known by what you believe.
If you have the right doctrine.
If you have the right belief, you're in or out. So I don't believe that God, the judgment's going to come there. God is the true judge. Jesus won't. In fact, we just read it. Jesus is the true judge. And I'm just glad I don't have to do it. But as someone who believes that that God has given me truth, that we worship in spirit and in truth, and we worship, at least have an understanding that the worship is acceptable to God. This is acceptable worship. If someone is claiming to true worship that's not, I believe, is not acceptable to God, I'm called to tell them about it. Is that fair?
Is it fair or right to ask God to help us in worship in spirit?
Oh, that's it. The only way you can do it. First of all, are you a Christian without God? If left to our own choices and devices, we don't seek God. It's a verse. No one seeks God, no one but one. I mean, I'm trying to think of the verses that, huh? Yeah. No, not one. We don't do it naturally. It's not going to be a part of us. Only God does it through us. The only way I worship God correctly is God putting it in me to do it, which should lead me to greater worship of God, because it's all about Him. It's all about Him, and allowing it to be all about her for you. And the same being the same for her for you. It's a submission competition. We submit to God and submit to our partner. And then we submit to each other. Because it doesn't just extend to our wife.
love God, love others.
They will know who He is by our love for each other.
Yeah, there is. This one was, I knew this was going to be good. You guys, my brain and truth is amazing. Spirit is amazing. Grace is amazing. Trust, mercy, forgiveness. I need a lot. God love. Here's the thing. I love because God first loved us. I can forgive because God first forgave me. This can happen out of all of the turmoil that's going on in my life and in all of our lives. This can happen because God loves us and forgives us and has mercy on us. All right, I'm praying. Father, we love you. We thank you for your truth, your spirit, and your constant pursuit of us. There is, you pursue us. Our chief end is to seek you and be satisfied in everything that you've done for us. thank you for this group. Thank you for us just talking and sharing and being and growing our faith together, because it just makes us stronger in our understanding of who you are. In your son's name, amen. This gets better every week. I'm sorry. I knew it would. It is.